Ladies and gentlemen, this week on the program, the other side, the dark side, if you will, of last week's episode. Last week, we talked about being ready for those opportunities when they come. This week, we look at what do we do when those opportunities go. I've been facing this disappointment a little bit lately, and I've got some ideas for you about how to deal with, how to react to disappointment constructively with examples. I think it's useful, I think it's educational, I think it's helpful, and we'll get to it on the other side.
Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay.
It's amazing how some days you just don't have it. Some days you just don't have it. Now, as you know, I am an avid follower of sports, of sporting, mostly of your European football, aka soccer. And I think now, in this moment, I think of all the times when I've watched a game, I've watched my team, it's mattered, and it just seemed like they didn't show up. They just got on the pitch and crapped the bed, just didn't show up. And I juxtapose that now with today. Today being Manic Monday, recording day here at the JHP. This is when we produce our primary number one flagship product, which is the podcast. And I sat down this morning and nothing. I had an episode all laid out. I had my bullet points. I had my flow. I had it all set to go and just wouldn't happen. And I sat here and I sat here and I sat here. And I'm savvy enough now to know that when I find myself in that position where it's just not happening, usually that means I'm coming at it from a more academic perspective, coming at it more head than heart. And I think what makes this podcast go, what makes most podcasts go, is the heart part. And if the heart is just not in what you're about to do, even if it makes perfect sense academically, sometimes when it just doesn't feel like it's resonating, it just doesn't come out. I was worried about this going in because I laid out this episode. It just didn't feel right to me. Just for whatever reason, it just didn't feel right to me. And I don't know. I don't know what to say about that, except sometimes you just have to trust the creative intuition that comes into your mind. But it kind of leads me into a discussion of something that came up on last week's episode. Last week, I talked about NFL head coaching jobs. And one of my favorite times of year in the NFL is this period of time when head coaches get the job, some of them for the first time. You know, vacancies become available and somebody's life changes in an instant with one phone call. Now, the corollary to that, the other side of that, is that, in order for one of those jobs to come up for a person, somebody else has to lose it. And I said at the time, that's a topic for another podcast, and maybe this is the podcast. Because I've been thinking about disappointment, okay? I've been thinking about disappointment with respect to, let's say, my particular job search. You know, I have run up against disappointments in the last little while. Jobs that I have applied for which I was qualified. Jobs that I've interviewed for which I was qualified. You know, there was one in particular where I felt like I had a really good shot and just got ghosted. And it sucks to get ghosted, man. And it can really affect you. It can really affect you when you brush up against a disappointment. And I've had them at various times in my musical career. Anybody who plays music for a living, especially a side player, is going to run up sooner or later against pretty heavy disappointments, man. It just goes with the territory. And that is gigs you didn't get or gigs you lost. That's the most obvious thing. I think to myself, back when I was playing with Hearts, we were more than once nominated for awards. There are a couple of times that we were nominated for awards that I felt we deserved, that we had earned, and we didn't get them. And so that's another way that as a musician, you just run up against disappointment, and it can happen all the time. And it happens in everybody's life. It happens in your relationships. You didn't get the girl, or you lost the girl, and it gets way more intense than that, you know? I've reached that age of my life where a lot of my friends have separated from their spouses. Divorce is happening. You know, disappointment runs through people's lives in all kinds of ways. And it's been on my mind lately, partly as the other side, the dark side of that head coaching moon, if you will allow such an awkward metaphor. And I think about it in terms of this job search of mine. And I think about it in terms of even the podcast. Anybody who produces anything, a lot of the time, you're just a little bit disappointed in the return. And it's got me thinking about how do we deal constructively with these disappointments? How do we deal when things just don't quite go our way, you know? And so I've been thinking about my own reactions to things. I've been looking in online to what some of the experts say about how to handle disappointment. Because kids, we all face it, okay? And so I've just come up with a series of ways in which to deal with disappointment. And I hope by the end of this, it turns into something useful and resonant for you. And the first thing I think is important when facing a disappointment is to simply feel it. Simply feel the disappointment. That's a difficult one to do because, generally speaking, disappointment feels bad, kids. Thinking about having interviewed for a job and thinking I was qualified for it and had done well with the interview, feeling as though I was a really good choice for it, and then just being utterly ghosted by the organization. Painful thing, man. And it brings up the sorts of feelings that are a real struggle for me. It brings up that feeling of inadequacy. It brings up that feeling of not being good enough. And then for me, at the age I'm at, in the stage of life I'm at, in the position I'm in, I take a look at that and say, I'm just not going to find my way back into the field I was in before. Like I'm aging out of it, or I've been out of it too long for people to take me seriously as a candidate, even though I am a serious candidate. And for me, it's very easy in that position to begin to ramp up this fear, right? And it depends on the circumstance you're in. It depends on the disappointment you're in. You know, not winning an award is not really an existential kind of thing. But if you're in this position where you're just not getting the job and you're reaching an age and ageism exists, and I'm not saying that's the reason I'm not getting these jobs, but it's not unreasonable to pull that into your mind. And then you begin to get desperate and fearful, right? Like, I can't change my age. I can't change a lot of this stuff. And all of a sudden, you find yourself like me, becoming very, very, very fearful that you might be screwed. And it's easy to let a disappointment pull those attachments out of you. It's easy to let a disappointment inspire those feelings and to begin to rabbit hole on it. You know, as a creative person, if the songs are not coming out and you find yourself facing a kind of writer's block or a painter's block, a creative block of any sort, you can begin to feel as though the gift is gone. You can begin to feel as though I'll just never be able to produce a piece of art again. And if you're like me, it's so easy to begin to spiral on that. And what that does is it takes you out of your intuition. It puts you into this awful thinking mind. The saboteur, the self-critic, the self-flagellation, all that stuff we've talked about can be inspired by the simple disappointment of not being able to produce the work that morning. And the spiral begins, you know. Or the other side of that is that we deflect it, right? I feel this awful feeling and I shouldn't feel it. You know, we punish ourselves for feeling things and we shouldn't do that, all right? Your feelings are valid no matter what they are. The question is what you do with the feelings you feel, but you can't do anything with them unless you allow yourself to feel them. And the thing that happens is if you push those down, if you refuse to feel things, if you adopt this kind of toxic positivity approach to the world, which is to kind of put your fingers in your ears and say, la, 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 la. That's not helpful. You push that stuff down and it pops up later in whatever, an emotional outburst, this weird anger that you can't shake. This stuff grows in you. It can turn into dis-ease. Not feeling the feelings is not a helpful response to a disappointment. So the first thing I think you need to do is feel the feelings. All right, I get ghosted by an organization and ghosting is they don't tell you, right? So just over time goes by and you begin to think like, well, I'm kind of on the edge here of when I can reasonably expect a response to this. We're on the edge here of where I can reasonably expect the next steps to be put in place. And I haven't heard a word. And then more time goes by and then more time goes by. And you begin to make up excuses for, oh, it's Christmas time. I don't know. Maybe this is there. There's a delay. I don't know. But sooner or later, it becomes apparent that this just ain't going to happen. That for whatever reason, you're out of the running. And there's like a cumulative disappointment that comes with that. And the temptation is to just put your fingers in your ears and la, la, la that away. And I think it's not helpful. And I think it's okay to look at that and be disappointed, to feel that disappointment in you, right? Because for whatever reason, it would have been nice for that thing to work out. It would have been nice for that person to say yes to the date. It would have been nice for that gig to have come through. And it didn't. And it's a disappointment and it hurts. And it's okay to feel the hurt, all right? It's okay to even have a whine, W-H-I-N-E, about the hurt, okay? It's important to acknowledge and process your feelings. Denying a feeling of disappointment is denying that part of yourself that it mattered to. And this self-denial becomes a kind of self-division. So it's important to feel it. And I've had to go through that. Various job situations recently, gigs in the past, stuff that just didn't pan out the way I really hoped it would. And you can feel it, and you're allowed to feel it, and you're allowed to indulge that feeling. But the key is to know when to let that feeling go. That's an individual thing. I think it's perfectly fine to feel it, acknowledge it, sit with it. And then when you get the opportunity to begin to think about what the feelings really mean. Like, what can we learn from this situation? Why are we feeling the disappointment in this case? And in a lot of cases, it's not even the thing or not having the thing that's disappointing. It's some feeling that we attach to the thing. Now, in the case of a job search, there are practical realities. Okay, would have been nice to have that consistent income. And that's 90% of why most people are applying for any freaking job. Right? There are practical things, but then you dig a little bit deeper. You dig a layer deeper. It's like, why am I disappointed? Well, I could use the money. Yes. Okay, fair enough. What else? Well, there was dignity in it. There was dignity in having that regular employment. Okay, well, what does that mean? And then you begin to open up this can of worms about what you value and about what you think makes you important is the wrong word, but what is important to you. It's like, I really needed a job because it's important for a person to have a job. Whereas other people might be like, I don't really want that job. I'm an entrepreneur and this is an identity I'm holding up. And then they go down a different sort of rabbit hole. And so when you encounter a disappointment, when your band doesn't win the award that you thought you deserved, there's the initial surface reaction to that. But what's underneath it? And these disappointments give you an opportunity to really look at your values and your attachments. My band didn't win the award. And what's really disappointing is that we didn't get the recognition. It's not the award. The award is a piece of freaking paper. It means absolutely nothing. Being nominated is as valuable as winning. But what are the feelings and what are the validations that come with the winning? And it's like, maybe you wanted that acknowledgement and it's that you were really chasing and this was one way to get it. Or you wanted a date with that person because that person has a social status that reflects favorably upon you. there may be a lot of reasons for the disappointment that go beyond the superficialities. So once you've gone through this process of feeling the feeling, you can begin to inquire into what the feeling actually means. Did you have your heart set on working for that company? No. I had my heart set on having the kind of dignity that comes with holding down a full-time job, because I spent my whole life, this is not me talking necessarily, it's a hypothetical. I spent my whole life feeling like a joke, and this was my chance to prove it. Getting this job at this company would demonstrate to everybody that I have this value and I have this potential, because I've never felt like people acknowledge my potential, or I never felt like I actually had any, and here's the proof. And then you go a layer beyond that, and it's like, why do I need people to acknowledge that about me? Like, there are layers and layers and layers and layers, and these disappointments open that stuff up. I really wanted the gig with that band because they're my favorite band and I love the music. Okay, that's good to know. Or they're touring arenas and I really want to tour arenas. I want to have that experience. Okay, that's fair. What is it about that experience that appeals to you? And what does it mean? Does it just mean that you're legit? Is it just a cool thing to experience? Is it that band has name recognition and you want the cred that comes with it? Like, what is it that you're looking for that set up that disappointment so hard? And is it valid? Like, is that a legit thing or is that an ego thing? Does it really serve you to hold an attachment to needing a band at that level, or needing to sell a painting for this much money, or needing to earn this much in whatever business you're doing? Like, how much of the attachment that creates that disappointment is actually legit, and how much of it is just your ego wanting its tires pumped? And these feelings, and feelings in any circumstance, produce these great opportunities for inquiry, right? So you got disappointed by something. Why are you disappointed? And what values is it highlighting? And what attachments is it highlighting? And are they legit? Are they valid? Are they freaking useful? If you want to be in a certain band just so you can tell people you're in that band, that's not a great motivator. That's not a great value, because it might turn out that everybody in that band is a freaking jerk. That might be a nightmare scenario. You might be 6 months in that band and want to quit music forever, because the motivation to get into that situation was not, I really want to play with people I love, music I love, in a circumstance I love. And I should have gone for this other lesser known band because I know that the circumstances of that arrangement are better for my values. So there's an opportunity for learning here, okay? The other thing I think is important is not to personalize the disappointment, all right? If the disappointment is, especially if it's one that's out of your control. Arsenal last weekend just absolutely tore Liverpool apart in an absolutely critical, vital Premier League game, an absolute must win, or at least must not lose game for Arsenal, all right, against league leaders Liverpool. Vital game, freaking huge. And Arsenal came out and tore them a new one. So take that, Liverpool. A brilliant 3-1 win, warmed our cockles all over North London and beyond. Could have lost that game. They've lost that game in the past. And what a disappointment that has been. You know, if you are an Arsenal fan, you have endured your fair share of disappointment over the past 20 years. And it's okay to feel it. It's okay to feel that. But don't personalize it. You cannot personalize disappointments that are beyond your freaking control. I can't control if the 49ers win or lose the Super Bowl this weekend. And I'm not a fan either way. I'm just using it as an illustration. You can be disappointed if your team wins or loses, but you can't control it. And so don't personalize this. A lot of the problems in the world is that people personalize the impersonal. This is why you go to see a Toronto FC match and up in the corner, there's a little group of Glasgow Rangers fans and a little group of Glasgow Celtic fans. Neither of those teams is on the pitch, but such is the tribalism, such is the ego attachment, such is the antagonism between the two that a war breaks out in the upper corner of the stadium between these two sets of fans that aren't even there to see one of their teams. And that's personalizing the impersonal, right? That's taking things to extreme lengths. And it's this attachment to a tribe and whatever it is you get out of that. I understand hostility towards other fans. I get it. And I understand human nature and I understand ego, but it's not helpful. It's pointless, actually, to personalize disappointment or rejection over which you have no control. A sports match, whatever it is. Even in the case of a job search, you can only do what you can do, right? You can submit your resume. If you're lucky enough to be selected for an interview, you can go and give everything you've got to the interview. And if you come away from that and you know you did your best, and for whatever reason, you just didn't get it, there's a temptation, and it's easy to make that about you. To make that about, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not qualified enough, people always reject me. It's very easy to personalize that when in large part, in most cases, it has nothing to do with you. I can remember many years ago interviewing, I think I interviewed twice for this position. It was like 2 hours of my time was donated. I may have had to even do some writing assignments, whatever, for this position in healthcare. And I didn't get it. And then I found out later there was a preferred candidate all along. So I could have come away from that whole experience thinking, well, I'm never going to get a job with anybody because I'm not qualified, because I did all the work and I did my best and I did the interviews and I was charming and personable and knowledgeable and eloquent. And then I didn't get it anyways. And you can absorb that and take it personally like it's the problem is me and I'm screwed and life sucks. And it wasn't that at all. There was a preferred candidate all along. They just weren't upfront about that. There's so much rejection that people face has nothing to do with themselves at all. But if you're inclined the way I am, you just absorb that as your own anyways. And so it's important not to personalize the disappointments. But having said that, it's also important to recognize if you have not done as well as you could have. And the temptation there is, again, to berate yourself and to get on your own case and to beat yourself up and to self-flagellate about not being good enough. But it's not necessarily a case of being good enough, rather a case of doing good enough. And if you're not doing good enough, you can improve. And so you can see this in the music world all the time. Person goes out, auditions for this band, and doesn't get the gig, and didn't deserve the gig. Sometimes that's just legit. And the temptation with the disappointment is to personalize it, is to make it your fault. And to a certain extent it is. But the reality is there's a lot to be learned from that, right? And so if you find out later that the reason you didn't get that drum chair is because your time wasn't quite right, or your feel wasn't quite right for what they were looking for, and it's legit, you can look at that and say, okay, next time around, I'll be ready because I'm going to go work on those things, right? There's a lot of information. There's a lot of feedback to be learned from a rejection and from a disappointment if you can approach it from a healthy perspective. I think of Emily Dolan Davies, twice a guest on this podcast, talking about the most critical moment of her career as a drummer. And she's a full-time touring pro now and has played a lot of high-level gigs. She's a teenager. She got called into a session for the first time in a real recording studio. She thought, here it is. I'm legit now. It's a big break. And she worked up these songs and she went in to record with these seasoned pros. And she was just all over the place. She could not play on the click properly. And long story short, they asked her to leave. They asked her to go home. And she's a teenager. She's devastated. She's heartbroken. She didn't leave her room for like 3 days. But eventually, it's like, okay, I felt it. And now I can be mature enough to say the issue was I couldn't play well enough on a click. And that's never going to happen again. And so she set herself to making sure she brought her level up to where it needed to be to play in the rooms that she wanted to play in. And so it is with anything. If the reason that you've been rejected or the reason that you're facing this disappointment is legitimately that you're just not where you need to be. And that can be an existential crisis as an athlete, let's say. And it's most of them, if they have aspirations to playing pro or playing in the bigs, 90% of them don't get there and eventually have to reach this point where they've maxed themselves out. And it's like, okay, this is never going to happen for me. And that's a disappointing thing at the highest level, because you can't walk away from that and say, okay, I can fix this, this, and this, and that'll set me up to do it. But that brings us to another interesting approach to disappointment, which is a very Taoist approach to it. There's one of my favorite lines in the Tao Te Ching, chapter 13, which simply says, have faith in the way things are. Sometimes that disappointment, that rejection you're dealing with is actually the best freaking thing that could ever happen to you. I have heard countless tales. I've had them, people I know in my own life, who got let go from a job, got laid off, got fired, whatever. And that turned out to be the best damn thing that ever happened to them, because they had no choice then except to start the business they always wanted to start anyways. Were afraid to step out of the nest, and then life, the universe, the way things are, pushed them out into the great wide open. And I've seen that happen in music, just like the example I gave before, where you finally got the gig you wanted with that band, and they turned out to be a freaking nightmare, and you hated it. And so sometimes you can look at a rejection, you can look at a disappointment, and have faith in the way things are. Say to yourself, I probably dodged a bullet there. And I've seen that in my own career as a musician. Gigs I didn't get, gigs that I lost at some point along the way. You can step back and you can say, well, actually, that's for the best, because it turns out that 2 months, this is not, again, my example, but it's a possible example. I didn't get the chair with that artist I wanted, and that soul destroying, because it would have set up everything. And then 2 months later, that band broke up or that artist went off the road, and you're like, oh, wow, if I had got that gig, I would have had to reject whatever other offers came in. And then 2 months later, it was over. This happens all the time. And so it's an advanced level reaction to look at a disappointment, to look at a rejection and say, well, that's for the best, because that thing wasn't going to work out anyways. And I have to approach this job search exactly the same way. And this position I interviewed for, that I thought I was well suited for and qualified for, and it seemed, at least it made sense that I would move on to the next phase of the process. And I got freaking ghosted, and I have to sit back, and instead of becoming anxious and fearful and freaking out and losing my mind because I've aged out of my, whatever it is, out of my profession, I suppose, or whatever it is, I'm just never going to get hired again in this position. Instead of looking at it that way, looking at it like, okay, that was not the gig for me. I'm having faith in the way things are, which is that one didn't come to me. And there's got to be a good reason for that. And maybe if I had got that job, the boss would be just a prick and I would freaking hate it. Or in 6 months, the whole department would be downsized or shut down entirely. There's some reason why that one didn't come to me. And so from that, you can draw a bit of faith. You can draw a bit of optimism. It's like, okay, that one didn't come to me because something better will. And when I've not gotten gigs, or when I've lost gigs that I had, I've had to stop and say, okay, there's a silver lining here. All right, there's a reason why it ended here. Like, my work with this artist is done. I did what my curriculum was here, learned the lessons, made the connections, and now it's on to the next thing. Or, I really wasn't happy here anyways, and I didn't have the strength to pull the ripcord, and so life, the universe, pulled the ripcord for me, and have faith in the way things are. That's a difficult thing to do. That tends to be one that you come to after this process of grieving. You're allowed to grieve, this process of feeling the feelings. And then if you are approaching life with a positive frame of mind, with a spiritual kind of approach, you can stop and say, okay, that one didn't come to me, or that one went away from me because it was time for that to happen, or it wasn't the right thing for me, at least not right now. And I can get excited because that leaves room for whatever is meant for me to come along. So it is with relationships. Now I got lots of friends. All those people who are separated from their spouses are on the dating apps now. And I do not envy them. And they're playing this game now of dating again and whatever. And it's just a constant stream of disappointment. Even if you're not getting rejected, can just be, we're not finding anybody of any real interest. And so can you step back and say, all right, not meant for me at this time. Maybe there are other things that I need to prioritize, whether that's your kids or just your personal development or who knows what it is. Now is not the right time. Now is not the right circumstance. And so can you draw some positivity? Can you draw some faith and optimism from things that don't come to you, which had they come to you would be a freaking nightmare in the end, because you don't need that. You've already left the nightmare. You don't want to go back into one, right? And when you come to this part of the parade, where you've felt the feelings and you've accepted it and you've considered what you might learn from the situation, whether you need to improve something, whether there are underlying attachments that this position or this person might have fulfilled for you that aren't helpful. When you've done that, when you've taken a step back and said, okay, not meant for me, great. The next thing to do, I think, is just to simply have a feeling of gratitude for what you do have that's good. All right. I've been ghosted for a job. It sucks. Not much I can do about that. Again, it's one of those things that's not really in my control. I've done my best. It hurts. I've considered what it is about that position or this whole job search that is viable to me, what matters here, what's ego and what isn't. What can I look at right now and say I'm grateful at least for this? I'm grateful that, financially speaking, we're fine. I'm grateful that I'm healthy. I'm grateful that, in your case, I'm grateful that I have my kids, or maybe you've got your career and that's all great. And some other rejection came to you. You're a musician. You didn't get the gig. You're struggling for gigs right now. It didn't come to you and it sucks and it hurts and you've thought about it. What are you grateful for? Well, I'm grateful for this other band that I play in once in a while. Or I'm grateful for just the instrument that I have. Or I'm grateful for past experiences that I've had. What can you do to frame everything, put a silver lining of gratitude around your life? Even if what's happening right now is disappointing, even if what's happening right now hurts, is that big picture? And can you pull away and look at the big picture that says, okay, I still have options. I'm still okay. I'm still healthy. I still have people in my life. I like this. I'm grateful for that. I got freaking food. A lot of people don't. I got a roof over my head. A lot of people don't. And can you approach everything with this sense of gratitude? Because I think there is momentum in that. I think there is flow. I think the universe responds to a sense of gratitude. And I've had to do it too. I've had to do it too when a bitterness has begun to creep in a little bit. When things haven't worked out, whether that's musically or whether that's with a regular job or whatever. I've had to step back and say, okay, commit to this gratitude. What's good in your life right now? Can we hold on to that? And can we pull a positive momentum from feeling grateful for the things we do have instead of bitter and disappointed by the things we don't? Again, that's a high level technique. All right. That takes real discernment. That takes maturity. That takes humility. And I think it just sets you up for a better flow of life. I'm not great at it, but it's one that I have to do very consciously, right? So see the positives that you have. See some gratitude in your circumstances, even if what you wanted didn't pan out, or if what you wanted did pan out and it sucks. Have the gratitude. And I think the last thing for our purposes today is when you've gone through this whole process and you find yourself on kind of level ground again, take a positive step forward. Begin again the process. And that can be a real act of courage. What does it mean for the job seeker? Well, you let go of the one that didn't come for you and you're grateful because it wasn't the right one for you and it would have sucked if you'd got it. And okay, here's another one. Let's put out the resume. Let's begin this process again. Let's begin moving forward. You didn't get the gig you wanted? Okay. What else is available? Let's talk to some of my other musician friends. Let's see what they're up to. Let's begin making connections again. Let's go to a couple shows. Let's get back in the scene. Let's see who else is looking and see if there's an audition possibly. Let's maybe start our own thing. If what you want is not coming through, make your own freaking thing. Been on a few dates, had your heart broken, everybody sucks, fine. You go away, you process that, you're grateful, and okay, maybe I swipe right on this person, however you kids are doing that these days. But it's important to begin taking a step forward. Otherwise, you just kind of sit and wallow. And there is a time for sitting, right? There is a time for patience. There is a time for waiting. But when that time is up, and I think you know when that time is up, it's important to take a positive step forward into whatever direction you want to go. And that's how we close the book on this disappointment. Athletes have to do this all the time. If you're Liverpool and you've just been devastated and destroyed by Arsenal, and all of a sudden your lead at the top of the table is cut to just 2 points, and Manchester City lurking in third place with 2 games in hand, you want to be devastated because Arsenal has so thoroughly undermined your title credentials, has so thoroughly popped your bubble, they have so completely annihilated you that it's tempting to just collapse and fall away. But if you're a professional athlete and you've gone through this process, you have to take the next step forward, which is get on the training pitch today, begin prepping for your next game. Be a goldfish, as Ted Lasso says, put it behind you and take that step forward and stop thinking about Arsenal because you'll just have flashbacks like Rocky facing Clubber Lang. Take the step forward, okay? And that's, as far as I can tell with help from, Psychology Today, etc., I think this is a useful way to approach just disappointment. Feel it. Don't go crazy with the toxic positivity. Feel the negative feelings. They exist for a reason. What can you learn from those feelings? What do they suggest about your values and your attachments? Don't personalize stuff that isn't personal, but learn how you can improve if you need to improve. Look for the silver linings. See the positive. Approach with gratitude. Take a step forward. And then when you do that, keep in your back pocket the resilience you've shown to get past whatever it was, right? You can draw on this later because more rejection will happen, kids. It will happen throughout your freaking life. Whether it devastates you or not depends on how you react to it. And so if you can look and say, well, a year ago, I lost this gig with this band and I went through this process and I dealt with it. And then you come across another disappointment later. You say, I don't know if I can deal with this. You look back at the situation you came through and you're like, well, I did it before. I have been resilient in the past. As they say, everybody alive today has survived 100% of the worst things that have ever happened to them. So draw on your resilience. Be pleased with how you've navigated this stuff before. Draw some strength from it and know that you can carry on, and it just makes you stronger each time, all right? And if you're looking at your situation right now and you're thinking, I can do this, I can face this disappointment, I can turn it around, I can do something with it, I can use that energy. I really want to show some gratitude to this guy on this podcast for saying all that. Consider supporting on Patreon. Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast, kids. I do have a Patreon for this thing. I'm using that to monetize this program in lieu of forcing you to endure all the freaking ads. I don't have time, even right now, to do another railing against ads, but I hate podcasts that are seem to be just excuses for blocks of ads. I don't want to do that. I find it annoying. And so I started the Patreon. And if you're digging the show, man, if you are inspired, educated, if you're learning things, if you're finding out about new music, and I'm going to talk about some in a minute, if you're just getting something from this podcast that's bringing you back week upon week, please consider supporting on Patreon, all right? It's $5 a month. It is not a huge time commitment. It's a cup of coffee. It's, as I say, a $1.25 tip for every episode I do. If you feel as though this episode's worth $1.25 to you, please consider just supporting on Patreon. It is a voluntary way to support, as opposed to me obligating you through your attention to support by listening to ads or whatever. Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. And thank you to the people who have done that so far. Very quickly, please just share the episodes. If you don't want to do the Patreon thing, that's totally fine. Just share them. Makes such a huge difference. Word of mouth is the key. I've learned this over years of trying different methods of promoting the show, trying to get it to grow, and nothing is as effective as a listener saying to somebody who likes podcasts, you might want to listen to this podcast. Please consider doing that. Please share the teasers that I put out, Instagram, Facebook. Just please, if you have an opportunity, if you can find it within your heart, just to share the episodes, tell a friend, whatever. It all helps enormously, okay? As do ratings and reviews, preferably positive ones on your preferred podcast platform. Got all the P's out this time. Woo. Merch. I'm working on some new shirt designs. Go to Instagram, go to Facebook, the John Huff Podcast, and you can see those designs. And let me know what you think. I may put some of those into production. I've got some samples coming so I can see what they look like. john-huff.com/shop. If you want to wear the JHP swag loud and proud, I got t-shirts there. I got mugs. Thinking about other merch ideas. If there's any interest, thank you so much to the people who have purchased merch through my shop, Patreon, and the shop, and reviews and all the stuff. I just thank you. Okay, very quickly before we go, I got to leave you with some new music. This week, for the first time, and it probably shouldn't be the first time, we're talking about The Warning. A lot of you know about The Warning. The Warning is this band from Mexico, all right? It's three sisters, Daniela, Paulina, and Alejandra Villarreal Velez. Three very young sisters who burst on the scene like 10 years ago or something, 8-10 years ago, with this cover they did of Enter Sandman. And it went supremely viral on your YouTube, like 20 million views, something like that. And all of a sudden a buzz was started. At the time they were kids, like teenagers. And I remember seeing that when it came out because it made the rounds, you know. Everybody wants to send me Prodigy kind of stuff. Like my inbox is regularly violated by a video somebody sends me of a 9-year-old drummer who's just way better than I am. And they think I'm impressed. I'm not impressed. It's just another kid that I have to eliminate. And they're beginning to pile up. All right, so stop with that. So I remember seeing the Enter Sandman thing when it went around, and it was great. And it was obvious that there's real talent in this band. These three sisters, they're not even twins. They're just born. And one plays guitar and sings, one plays bass, one plays drums, and they're killer. And it's interesting, though, you know, because they say these days virality is the only way to get a record deal. Truth is, they put out a couple records independently after the Enter Sandman thing, before they ever did get a record deal, which they did. And they're just a really good rock band, really good players. The drummer, Pau Villarreal, she won the 2023 Up-and-Comer Award for Modern Drummer. She won the 2023 Drumeo Rock Drummer of the Year. She's like 20 or 21, something like that. Really, really great player and getting a lot of attention from the industry, as is this band. And they've gone around opening for Guns N' Roses and opening for The Killers, playing big stadium gigs, opening for people. And in Mexico, I think they're just enormously popular, as you might expect. Just these three sisters from Monterrey and crushing it, man. And so The Warning has a new song out. They released a single last week. It is called Sick, stylized S exclamation mark CK. Sick by The Warning. And it's my musical recommendation of the week. This is an interesting band. Pretty heavy, all right? There's something that this song really distinctly reminds me of, and I can't just put my finger on it. But for those of you who pal around the heavy rock scene, they remind me on this track at least a bit of Monster Truck. So that kind of big, gnarly, in-your-face guitar sound. And it comes in like really upbeat with a cool, kind of like a Foo Fighters riff. And then it just goes halftime. And all of you musicians out there know what happens when heavy guitars go halftime. Heads start banging. And so verses are halftime, and then it goes to straight time, and the choruses, it picks up. And what happens when you go halftime into straight time is it has the effect of really picking up the momentum on a song, even if the tempo's not that fast. If you've come from halftime, feels that way. And so there's some real dynamics happening here with time. And it's just a heavy song, man. It's a big banging song. Sick by The Warning. And it's a good band. I should have talked about them long ago. They've been dropping albums now, I don't know, for 8 or 9 years. Some of them independent. Some of them are label records. And they're just doing really, really great. And it's cool to see young people playing rock and roll. All right, the Grammys were last night. And I didn't watch them because the Grammys aren't for me. A, because I'm 50. And B, because I like rock music. So the Grammys aren't for me. And so it's nice to see young people picking up instruments and just slam a jamming. And The Warning is great. So if you have not checked out that band, check out the new single, Sick by The Warning. I will put it on the John Huff podcast, referenced on the podcast 2024 playlist on Spotify. That is beginning to accumulate. Some good stuff on there. I dig The Warning. I think they're freaking cool. I'm going to shutting up now. I want to thank you ever so much for listening this far. If you have, I want to thank you ever so much for your support, for your feedback on the recent episodes. It's been very encouraging. Thank you so much. Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast, john-huff.com/shop. And think about your disappointments if you're facing them, man. Think about this process, what you might learn, how you might react in a more positive way, and how when the time comes, you might make that crucial step forward. Have yourselves a fine week. Remember that good things happen when you put yourself out there. And hey, kids, I'll check you later. Yeah. Sick!